Anybody who is serious about a relationship with our God and Jesus Christ, it is incumbent on all of us, and we took on this obligation when we went under the waters of baptism, to fight back the pulls of our nature. You entered into a fight voluntarily by virtue of validating the calling you received from God. And upon repentance and baptism, engaged in the ring, in the fight of your life, to battle back your nature, to constrain your thoughts, your appetites, your fleshy pulls, which by nature is the trend, the proclivities, the tendencies that we as human beings are subjected to. Are we not? Of course we are. The carnal mind, we know, by virtue of what God's Word says, is enmity. It is opposed to God's way, God's law. So it takes effort. And not everybody's cut out for this. And it doesn't come easy. And if you think it does, we are wrong, brethren. We have to truly be proactive in making decisive decisions about certain habits, habitual ways in our new lifestyle. We can't be expecting any kind of changes in our life if we don't take the time to engage in some real proactive changes in our life. What am I talking about? I'm talking about conversion, right? Of course I'm talking about that. That's what we're talking about in the Christian way. Conversion. But how do we assure ourselves of this conversion process? That's the method I want to talk about a little bit, because assuring ourselves of the conversion process will certainly help us to battle back the encroachments of this secularism and, of course, humanism that we find ourselves faced with. All of us have heard the saying, have we not? What you eat is what you are. You ever heard of that saying? What you eat is what you are. I submit to you that Jesus Christ taught us this, that what you think, you become. What you think, you become. I bring your attention over here to Matthew chapter 5. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 5 for a moment. I want to illustrate to you this principle that Jesus espoused and promoted. He says it right here. In this section of the Beatitudes, the attitudes to be, in chapter 5 of verse 17, think not that I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. I've not come to do that, but to fulfill. That's what he says, to fill it up, to essentially maximize it, to give you an example, a living example of what the law looks like in action, in human action. That's basically what he was saying. He goes on, though, here in this narration to get into some of the details of what I want to talk about. And here it goes to this point about what you think is what you become. Here he says, you have heard that it was said, verse 21 of chapter 5, Matthew, by them of old time, you shall not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of judgment. But I say unto you, and here's where Jesus goes now. He goes right to the thought process, because he knew that if we think this, ultimately it could lead to becoming this, or engaging in this. He goes to this and he says, if anybody is angry with his brother without a cause, shall be in danger of judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council, and whosoever shall say that you fool shall be in danger of hellfire. He goes on down here and he says, you have heard, verse 27, that it was said by them of old, you shall not commit adultery. Well, verse 28, I say this, that whosoever looks on a woman and lusts after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. So he's getting to the point here where he's essentially telling us, brethren, what you think is what you become. So don't think that. Yes, of course, it's one thing to look at this by telling us that this is actually sin magnified, and that's what Jesus was doing, was magnifying the definition of what sin is. But in so doing, in the course of that illustration, he's also telling us that get at your thoughts. Understand something. It's in the thinking process where conversion begins. You want to overcome fornication. You want to overcome appetites. You want to overcome the lust of your flesh in whatever way, shape, or form it may come to. And it's not only in sex. It could be in food. It could be watching too much TV, spending too much time with your particular hobby, or spending too much time gaming on your iPhone or your computer. Whatever it may be, whatever that appetite might be, that addiction, if I can use it in a broad sense, in that big term, addiction, whatever those addictions may be, if we spend too much time in those things, brethren, those things cause us to be hampered and stifled in our spiritual growth because they're taking up time. So, that brings me to the point that I want to talk about today. Just set the stage. The point that I want to talk about, and the word I want to introduce to you, is not a different word. It's not a word that you're unfamiliar with. But it is a word today I want to focus on, spend some time on, and emphasize. You know what it is? Meditation. Meditation. A simple word. Meditation. We're told over here in Corinthians, and oftentimes during the Passover season, this is brought to us quite profoundly, and we are reminded about this particular aspect of our Christian lifestyle. In chapter 13 of the second book of Corinthians, 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, we are told, "Examine yourselves whether you be in the faith. Prove your own selves. Know you not your own selves how that Jesus Christ is," and we talked about this last night, "is in you." There's that connotation again. There's that alluding to the fact that Christ is in you. The indwelling, the miracle of which the Apostle John was claiming the Gnostics were strongly passionate about attempting to stamp out, attempting to obfuscate, attempting to try to bury and camouflage and get those early New Testament Christians to deny and doubt that that was even a possibility, because it seemed, as far as the Gnostics was concerned, outrageous. And that's what they wanted people to think. They didn't want people to think that the miraculous working of God the Father through Christ could project His Holy Spirit to impregnate human beings to where they themselves, human beings, could literally become and considered sons of God, impregnated with something of an immortal, from an immortal dimension. Something that is from an eternal dimension. Something that is from the God side of the dynamic of life. The Gnostics didn't want you to think that that was possible, because they wanted you to think Jesus wasn't even divine. That's another story. We covered a lot of that last night, and I don't want to belabor that. But here we're told, look at this, Christ in you, how that Jesus Christ is in you, verse 5 here, chapter 13, 2 Corinthians, is in you, except you be reprobates. In other words, examine yourself so that you don't become void of judgment. Consider yourself. Think about yourself. Meditate. That's the only way you can examine yourself. You've got to take some time. You've got to focus on certain things. Meditation is often misconstrued. We think of meditation, the Maharishi, the Beatles, sitting down going, with your legs crossed in some kind of an Indian position, staring at a rock, or staring at a flower, or staring at an ant, or whatever it may be, and you're just thinking and letting your mind go blank. And a lot of these concepts come from Middle Eastern, Oriental type of understandings about what meditation allegedly is. And frankly, oftentimes leads to breeding in exposures into the demonic world. It just often does. Not always. Don't take me out of context here. It doesn't always. Nothing wrong with yoga and exercising in those areas, because it's good. There is certainly, I think, valid proof of illustrating some of those exercises are good for eternal organs and so on. But yoga is yoga, and not necessarily what I'm talking about in terms of Eastern meditation techniques that open yourself up to the possibility of being exposed to the demonic world. That's another story. However, I'm not talking about that type of meditation. What I'm talking about is the kind of meditation that God talks about. We're going to turn to some scriptures here in a moment. But what I'm talking about is this, taking very focused thought on a subject, something that is intrinsic to you, pragmatic, practical. You're not attempting to try to wipe your mind clean or clear of thoughts. No. What you're talking about here, what I'm talking about here, is grabbing a thought, something that's bothering you, something you're obsessing about, something that you feel you just need improvement on because you've examined thyself. You see, brethren, conversion begins in our mind, in our thoughts. If we don't pragmatically take the time to think about ourselves and how to improve certain aspects, segments, areas of our personality, of our lives, nothing is going to happen because God's not a magician. God's not a magician. It doesn't happen just by grand fiat. Oh, I'm going to convert. Well, if you think you're going to convert without meditating, you have another thought coming. And realize something, by the way. Meditation is only one of 4 major wheels that are intrinsic to your Christian growth. You want some keys to good, successful Christian living? I just did a series on this, by the way. It's going to be made available probably in the next couple of weeks or so. You need to remember this. Fast, Bible study, prayer, and meditation. Today I'm just covering one of the 4 wheels, 4 keys to successful Christian living. Meditation. Without meditation, brethren, you might as well be driving in a car with a flat tire. You need prayer, you need Bible study, and you need to fast occasionally to outside of the Day of Atonement. Outside of the Day of Atonement. Especially in times of trauma in your life. Or in times of great need. Perhaps for a loved one. Perhaps for a friend. Perhaps for something that you want God's attention on that's not for you, but maybe for someone else. Fast for them. You have to understand what fasting is all about. That's another subject, a whole subject in itself. But get the series. It goes into all 4 of these particular keys. But today I want to focus just on meditation, examining ourselves. If we think we're going to convert without changing our thinking, then we are dead wrong. Einstein's definition of insanity, many of you know it, was what? Doing the same thing over and over and over and expect a different result. Doesn't happen. If you got anger problems, you're going to continue to have anger problems until you figure out how to break the pattern of what is your trigger. Because the cycle will repeat over and over and over until the pattern is changed. We have patterns of thinking that make us who we are. We have patterns of thought, of processing, the way we consider things, digest information, and then logically proceed to a conclusion that generates us engaging in a result. We have a means of thinking to get there. That's why people never seem to get out of the holes that they find themselves in. They never change their thinking. They keep repeating their same patterns. They want to quit smoking, but they keep buying cigarettes. They want to reduce their drinking, but they keep buying a case of beer every week. They want to stop losing their temper, and every time an opportunity comes, they just lose their temper again. And they end up trying to figure out why they're so hot-headed when they don't really get into digesting and analyzing the factors, the triggers of why certain things happen the way they do. Deuteronomy chapter 6. What does God say about meditation? Over here, He says something really interesting to all of us. And hopefully we can digest this information and translate it into some motivation, because it gives us some idea of what we should aspire to. Now, obviously, it's going to take some change of patterns of thinking to get here in order to achieve this. Nevertheless, these are the goals of what God, through Moses, explains to us in terms of what we should be doing with our thoughts and our motives in life. He says here in verse 4, the Shema. Many of you are familiar with it. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. And essentially it reads that here, O Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim. He is one Yahweh. And you shall love the Yahweh, your Elohim, with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, with all thy might. These words which I command you, this is verse 6, chapter 6, Deuteronomy. These words which I command you this day shall be in your heart. Just meditate on that for a moment. How much do you truly believe there is indeed a God? I was talking to Mo before services here, and he was mentioning how he went out west for the Feast of Tabernacles this year, and was out there in Jackson Hole and out there in Colorado and those big Montana skies, and I referenced that last night. Remember that in respect to the awesomeness of God and those stars that I'm sure you saw out there where there was no lights, it was just pitch black, and those big western skies out there in Montana, Yellowstone, and all those areas, Jackson's Hole, the Tetons, those mountain areas, beautiful country. And when it goes dark out there, it goes dark. But as I was saying last night, out there in the country in Australia where the Southern Cross constellation was, and the fact that when I looked up I saw the smears of the Milky Way, the stars, it was just like a smear of stars. It was so dark out there. I never saw that before. Realizing that even though I'm looking at what I believe to be stars, they may not be stars. They could be just little twinkles, open windows of other galaxies. That's how big and awesome this universe is. And it's our destiny to be a part, co-heirs with Christ about this. That's awesome. When I think of our God being the Lord, our Father, who is the head of our household, the family of God, it is humbling, to say the least, to realize that we're connected to that kind of destiny. And here in Deuteronomy 6, verse 6, it goes to that point. Notice verse 7. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. So there we are at home and we're watching the news. Have we studied our Bibles yet? No. Have we talked to our children yet? No. Did we say anything to our kids about God today? No. But we sure have time to go out there and work on the car because that's our hobby. Or we have time to go ahead and watch that television series that we were so hooked into that we just can't get away from. So we spend an hour, 2 hours with the television, but zero time. Zero time in the other wheel of this four-wheel key, Bible study. How often would it be interesting to examine yourself, and I say this to me too, because I'm part of this audience. When I talk to myself as well. I just won't tell you which parts apply to me. But the fact of it is, how often do we examine ourselves to say, you know what, I'm not going to watch television until I spend a half hour studying my Bible at least today. I'm going to stop. No, I want to watch the news. I'm not going to watch the news. I'll get it later. I'll put on the recorder, whatever that thing's called. I'll put on the recorder. I'll go back to it later, but I'm going to first put things first. I'm going to Bible study first. Or I'm going to pray. Fasting takes a little bit more time and planning. But you know what I'm saying. If we would qualify our behaviors, this is what I'm talking about in the fundamental areas of changing patterns, of changing our thinking, of rearranging our priority. Wouldn't it be interesting to say, you know what, I'm hungry, I'm going to have a bowl of... No, I didn't pray yet. So before I eat this soup, because I am hungry, before I eat the soup, I'm going to go pray. I'm going to spend 15 minutes praying before I go eat. This is what I'm talking about in changing, examining yourself in every aspect of your life in this new lifestyle that you've taken up. You volunteered your walk. You have accepted and validated the calling that God gave you through Christ by Him the Father drawing you to Him through Christ. You accepted it. You repented. You went under the waters of baptism. So therefore, You're in the fight. You've engaged yourself. And consequently, with that, it isn't all about just lovey-dovey, warm and fuzzy, Jesus loves you. It is about real intrinsic, life-changing patterns that will actually result in activity of what shows forth converted behavior. Different behavior. Behavior that is evidence of the Holy Spirit working in you and in me. Verse 8, you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand. They shall be as frontlets between your eyes. That means whenever you're doing whatever you're doing. I've often used this analogy when I was in water treatment. I had a career in water treatment. I was a sales industrial engineer, supplying and servicing and engineering and designing water treatment systems for health facilities, for pharmaceutical manufacturing, for high-tech industry, as well as industrial eco paint lines and so on. And when we would go in, we would install a system. We might have a big system we got to install using 2-3-inch pipe, and all of this, a lot of piping, a lot of pumps, a lot of valves, a lot of switches, a lot of level switches and controls and monitors and all kinds of stuff, enough to drive you crazy. It's like a big erector set, who's got the directions. But my point is that when you put it all together, you want it to look nice. You want it to be symmetric. You want it to be plumb. You want it to be nice in appearance. You know why? Not because I represented my own company, WTW. No. Because I represented Jesus Christ. And my workmanship represented my God, who says, Bill, quality first. And if you made a mistake, bite the bullet, make the customer happy. See, those are values that, I don't want to make the guy, I'm going to lose money. I got to figure out how I can swindle this guy. See, no. Every part of our lives, honesty is the best policy. Even in the most intrinsic nuances of life. You're at the cash register, and she gives you more change than you deserve. And you say, oops, ma'am, no. You gave me too much. Here's the $5 back. Instead of, you only gave her a 10, but you tell her, hey, I gave you a 20. You owe me more money, and you didn't give her a 20, you gave her a 10. Those are things, brethren, that we are actually incumbent to employ in our lives. Every little aspect, whether it be in our hands, in the frontlets of our mind, and you shall write them upon the posts of your house and on your gates, everywhere you go. In other words, what we're being told by Moses here, from God through the inspired word of God, is the fact that we, as Christians, as God followers, should be doing everything possible to reflect God in everything in our lives. Everything. Notice what David said over here in Psalms 119. Look at this. Psalms 119. We even have a psalm about this that we sing in respect to this particular instruction that we find in the book of Psalms, chapter 119, verse 97. Oh, how love I thy law. We have that as a song. Oh, how love I thy law, ever with me. Da 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 da. It's a nice song. It reminds us, and we're singing this psalm. That's what we're singing. It's hard to beat those kinds of hymns when you sing psalms like this. Oh, how love I thy law. It is my meditation all the day. And that means to ponder. That means to contemplate. It means to think about. You through thy commandments have made me wiser than my enemies, for they are ever with me. I have more understanding than all my teachers, for your testimonies, your words, your stories, your instructions, what you have in the books that you've inspired through your prophets and apostles and all the writings that you have. Those are the testimonies. Your testimonies, he says, are my meditation. This is what I contemplate. It is this as to what I'm studying and attempting to try to inculcate into me to change these patterns of thinking, whereby when I used to get mad, I used to use different kinds of language, of which wasn't the best suited for the Christian persona, if you know what I'm talking about. And so I had to work on, because, oh boy, I knew how to use that kind of language prior to my conversion. I even made up words that were pretty creative. You know what I'm talking about? I had to change that pattern Lest, could you imagine me being up here and all of a sudden a word slipped? And I said something that I shouldn't have said? We call it vulgarity. That's what I'm talking about. But that changed. I used to smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I had to change. Had to change a pattern. Had to figure out the logistics. What was it? How can I stop this? It's killing me. So I stopped buying cigarettes and borrowing cigarettes, and finally I embarrassed myself into stopping, because I started borrowing cigarettes from my friends. But my point that I want to make is we have to engage in active, proactive behavioral patterns that change our thinking so that the things that we do change and the results become different in, as I say, different in evidence in our lives. Over here, Paul mentions this to Timothy, 1 Timothy. Over here, 1 Timothy, and in chapter 4, and in verse 14, he says here to Timothy, this young evangelist that was upcoming, he says, "Neglect not the gift that is in you, which was given you by prophecy," that is, speaking, with the laying on of hands and of the presbytery. "Meditate upon these things. Give yourself wholly to them, that your profiting may appear to all. Take heed unto thyself and unto the doctrine. Continue," that is, abide, remain, preserve yourself in the doctrines. That's what he means by continue in them. That's what the Greek word means. Continue, remain, preserve, abide, tarry in them. For in doing this, look at this. For in doing this is Paul's advice, the result of this is you will both save yourself. So you don't think I'm preaching to myself? Yeah, I'm preaching to myself because I need to be saved too, just as much as anybody in this room. But also, those who hear you, you shall help to save them as well. But how does this happen? It happens by listening to what Paul says. You meditate, you contemplate. When you're about to do something, you think it through. You don't just look at the short term, you look at the long term. You focus on it, you fixate on it. You turn it over in your mind. You look at it from different angles. You get out of your comfort zone. Put yourself out there and do something different that will break that pattern, so that the cycle will change. Changing that pattern so the cycle will change will help us to get through that conversion process. I mentioned certain things in passing. Maybe, of course, let's say you're blunt. You're a blunt person. Nothing wrong with being blunt. Except you run the risk, if you're too blunt, of hurting people's feelings. Maybe you lack certain people skills because every time you bluntly tell somebody about something regarding what you're thinking, you alienate them. You put them on the defense. And over a period of years upon years, you're still not getting it. You're as dumb as a box of rocks by virtue of not recognizing the fact that every time you speak and tell somebody about this in this kind of condition, they alienate themselves from you. They recoil from you. Maybe if you stop and think about the reaction that you got, because for every action, there is a reaction. For every effect, there is a cause. And sometimes it's not with the other person. Sorry to burst our bubble. I'm included in this. Sometimes it's just ourselves that causes these reactions to people. Whether it be with our children, whether it be with our mates, whether it be with our friends. So now the question becomes, all right, I'm a blunt person. Nothing wrong with being blunt. I would rather, frankly, I would rather deal with a blunt person, frank person, somebody who's honest with me, because I know where they stand with me. I would much rather prefer to deal with a person like that than a soothsayer who's giving me something that really isn't true, but he's appeasing me. So I really don't know who I'm dealing with or what I'm dealing with. Because a blunt person I can deal with. But the fact of it is we need to take it a next step and learn diplomacy. Learn tact. Learn to say to yourself, all right, I got to tell Tony this. I got to explain to Tony that something about Tony, how am I going to do this? Well, now, how would I like it if Tony would explain to me what I want to explain to him. And I put myself in Tony's shoes. And I go through this process of saying, would I say this? No, I wouldn't say that. Would I say this? No, I wouldn't. Because he'll react like that. No, I wouldn't. But how do I get through all of this? I think. I'm meditating. I'm running through dry runs. So when I go to the game and I approach Tony or Mo or Nelson or whomever, Miriam, I'm ready. And I'm thinking through. And I'm not going to allow Tony's reaction to throw me off, because I'm determined to be tactful. I'm determined to be diplomatic. If Tony says, "What are you saying there?" Well, now wait a minute, Tony. I'm trying to be nice here. I'm really honest. I'm trying to be. I tell him I'm trying to be diplomatic here about this, and hopefully that'll get more sensibility about the things. But my point that I'm trying to make here, brethren, is we got to think and prepare and do the best we can to do things differently. Anger management problems, self-control, child rearing. Maybe we watch too much TV, read the wrong materials, play too much. I've mentioned some of these things in passing already that cause us angst and cause us difficulties, whereby, frankly, cause us to repeat the cycles, because we don't change the patterns, because we don't take the time to examine our modes of operandi, our MOs. In Philippians here, if you turn with me to chapter 4, Paul gives us some advice on how to meditate and to think. He says here in verse 4, I'm going to break into the context. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand. Be careful for nothing. In other words, don't be anxious. Don't fill yourself with anxiety. Don't obsess over things. Don't worry yourself sick. Don't cross the bridge until you get to it, because you may be putting yourself through all kinds of angst for nothing, because you're worrying about a bridge up ahead that doesn't exist, or that you may end up avoiding. And you get yourself all riled up, your blood pressure, you start sweating, you start going through heebie-jeebies, you got kidney problems as a result, whatever it may be, because you're always obsessing over things that are not yet happening. And so we're worrying. There's nothing wrong with preparing, brethren, but keeping it in perspective so that we don't worry and drive ourselves to the point where we hurt ourselves through the obsessions that we may have. So Paul says here, look, don't be anxious. Don't fill yourself up with anxiety. But in everything, by prayer. See, this is that other wheel. You have to have prayer. You have to have Bible study. Periodically, you've got to salt and pepper your lifestyle with some fasting. But you certainly also have to develop the habit of meditating, slowing your life down so that you can learn the activity of prudence. You're going to make a big investment. You're going to buy a house. You're going to take on the responsibility of having a child. Take time to think about these big decisions. You're going to make a career move and change your whole career. Wow. You're going to make a major move in your college education. You've been majoring in medical, but now you want to major in art. Do you really want to do that? You're going from one extreme to another. That takes some thought. Why are you doing that? Go around and meditate a little bit with your friends even. Talk to them. But take some time. Think these things through, especially on big, major decisions that we have facing our lives from time to time. But he says here, in this particular case, be careful for nothing, but in everything, verse 6 now, Philippians 4, everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, it shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true. And these, verse 8, down there at the bottom, he says, think on these things. That's what he's telling us. He says, finally, brethren, think on these things. Let me take that last sentence there and put it up in the front so you know what I'm talking about. Put it in context here. He says, finally, brethren, and he says, think on these things now. Think on whatsoever is true, whatsoever is honest, just, pure, lovely, what's of good report. I'm gonna talk about Nelson. I think I'll tell Dwight. Now, why would I tell Dwight about this personal thing about Nelson? What good does it do? Well, it does me good. It makes me feel good because I got some knowledge about Nelson's secret, and I'm going to share it with Dwight so that I can tell Dwight. And then I know Dwight, because he's got kind of a big mouth. He'll tell other people. He'll tell other people. We'll get passing around, and then Nelson will get. I'll undermine Nelson. See? No, Bill, that's evil. That is sick. That's gossip. You see? You stop. Do you know there are people that are so caught up with themselves, I call them information brokers, where they leverage information. They live to get secret stuff on people. They even go around baiting people to find out something secret about your life, so that I can take it and leverage to him. And why do I do that? Because it makes me feel important, because I know something about her that you don't know about, see? So this is, I'm important. And that is wrong. And yet there are people in the church, I'm sorry to say, in the church, that sometimes do these kinds of things. And if they would only stop, ask themselves, what good does it do if I tell Tony about Patty? Patty confided in me about this, and I'm going to tell Tony? What does Tony have to do with this? Nothing. Why am I doing it? Ask yourself. Be brutally honest with yourself when you do the things that you do. Put yourself through the meat grinder. Qualify. Vet yourself. Examine yourself. What are your motives? What's your intent? Why are you doing the things that you do? What are you about to say about your neighbor, your friend, your mom, your dad, your kid, whoever it may be? Whatever the situation may be. Think it through, brethren, and take time to analyze and vet what you're saying. And that's what Paul is saying here. Look, think on these things. Is it true? Bill, are you being honest? I had a little motto in my company. I had it on the wall. Honesty is the best policy. You've probably heard that before. There were times when I could have made a lot of money doing something that was probably a little gray. But you know what? At the end of the day, Bill, honesty is the best policy. Wake up. And so you don't make as much money on the deal. But guess what? You still made money. You can only eat one steak at a time. And guess what? I can sleep better as a result of it. And so it is these things that we need to stop and think and ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do in this situation? And he goes on. Pure. Whatsoever things of good report. If there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Those things which have both learned, received, heard, and seen in me. You do. And the God of peace shall be with you. He goes on here in verse 13. After he talks a little bit about himself, he digresses. And then in verse 13, he tumbles to this. Bottom line, at the end of the day, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. That's important to recognize. See, you can change your patterns. You can change and break the cycles of the way you think and the way you come to logical decisions, if indeed you need to change those areas of your life. Because you've got God's Holy Spirit, you've got a supernatural power in you that sometimes, frankly, brethren, we all, me included, often underestimate the power we have residing in us. If we'll just take the time to think things through and do what we're supposed to do. You know, I've often seen people understand what we know rather easily. Intellectually, intellectually, it is not difficult to understand the arguments that we have, biblically speaking, theologically speaking, intellectually. You can talk and debate Christians and Buddhists, Hindus about reincarnation, all kinds of things, from your framing and from your platform and understanding of what you understand to be the gospel and the truth of God. And oftentimes, God be praised, we will have the most logical conclusions on the matter, simply because fundamentally we are connected to the apostolic teachings of the Bible. And there is an advantage with that. Nevertheless, the fact of it is, in this particular case, we ourselves don't have a hard time doing that. Where it gets difficult Where it gets difficult is in the application of this knowledge. That's the real difference. The transition of taking this intellectual understanding and knowledge that we have and then translating that information into our embodiments, into our personalities, employing it, inculcating it to where it makes a difference in our personalities, to where we become a living, converting, changing, dynamic force in our lives for God. That's where the challenge is for all of us. And the mechanisms by which we need to employ and utilize are fundamentally fasting, Bible study, prayer, and meditation. Without those 4 keys, brethren, implemented in your lifestyle, you are swinging and missing, and you're just spitting in the wind, as they would say. You need to take time in your life. You need to rearrange, evaluate, sit down and meditate, examine yourself. Where do you spend your time? How much time, be brutally honest, how much time are you spending in prayer a day? I'm not going to give you a standard. You need to make up your own standards. You need to establish what's good for you. What can you live with? Because what is not of faith is sin. That's another definition of sin, by the way, Romans 14. What is not of faith is sin. For me to impose upon you to pray 3 times a day, a half hour each time, hour and a half per day, is ludicrous. I can't do that. That's not for me to do, because that is your sovereign right to determine what is good for you, because it concerns your faith and your initiative and your passion for God. And if I do it and you don't, doesn't make me any better than you. Because guess what? You may do less and have better quality. And I'm just generating a lot of hot air for half the time, you know. I might as well just spend half the time in prayer, because I'm only speaking that much substance, so to speak. The rest of it is just snoring and waking myself back up as I try to finish going through what I'm going through. But in this particular case, what Paul is attempting to tell us here is that these are the things, these are right here on what to be vetting our personalities through. So in conclusion, I want to give you some real quick points on how to meditate. First of all, here's point number 1. Here's point number 1, the fundamental, basic. Here it is. Number 1, set some time aside. Make a conscious decision. Number 1. You've got to set some time aside. If a consistent time set aside works for you, fine. For those of us who have flexible demands on our life and different types of schedules that we keep, you will have to have a flexible time set for your meditation. My schedule's all over the place. I'm like Ricochet Rabbit. You know, my 2 days in a row, I'm lucky if they're the same, because I have different demands on my time. And some of you are like me in that regard. So I can't just set, you know, every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning when I get up, I'm going to meditate for an hour. I'm just still waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, let alone trying to meditate. You know, my mind isn't even in gear yet, you know, and I'd be silly to say it was. So we have to be flexible if we have to be flexible. For others of us who are more rigid, and we do have a very controlled and staid schedule in that regard, hey, if you set a regular time, 6 o'clock every evening, or when I get home from work, I'm going to just wash up, get my face, and I'm going to go to my bedroom, or I'm going to go back out on the porch, or I'm going to do something and just take some quiet time and evaluate the day and reassess what I did and how I acted and some of the things that I did and could do differently. That's when I'm going to do it. Hey, more power to you. That's fine. But you got to set some time aside. That's basic number 1. Number 2, think through the application of God's law in your life, circumstance. Analyze it. Ask, what does God want from me in this? Analyze it from God's point of view. You just got yourself reamed out by your boss today, and he let you have it. All right, maybe he isn't totally right about reaming you out for what happened, because so-and-so contributed to it and you ended up being the fall guy. But take accountability. Sit down. All right, maybe you don't have all the culpability, but nevertheless, where there's smoke, there is some fire. Take some time. Be brutal on yourself. Ask yourself, what could I have done differently? Take the time to think through the pattern that generated the cycle that created the results that came at you. And I use that only as an example. But it could be dealing with your wife or your husband. It could be dealing with your small little toddler or your teenage son or daughter. It could be the relationship that you've been developing with your sister or your brother. It could be the ongoing relationship that you got going with your dad and your mom. Whatever it may be, think about, how can I change this? This is not going right. If this continues to go in this direction, I know where it's going. I'm heading for a bruising. You know, you've heard that term, I'm cruising for a bruising. I can see it. I can see it coming. So, think through the application of God's law in your life circumstance. Compare it with God's law. Analyze it and ask, what does God want from me in this? Is there anything that I could be learning to better reflect God in my life? Point 3. When things go wrong, and this is what I was talking about, I got ahead of myself a little bit, ponder, analyze, what was violated? What went wrong? Start with yourself. Hold yourself accountable. Matthew 18. When someone offends you, we're told, hold that person accountable. What I am saying is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Not only externally do you hold somebody accountable for them offending you, but you hold yourself accountable too for the things that you do. So often we don't. We play the blame game. Elder Moreno pointed to Washington. That's all they're doing, the blame game. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know anything. Well, what did we hire you for? We hired you to know. You know? Why don't you know? Incompetent? I mean, it's one or the other. You either are incompetent and you really don't know, but you should know and you're not doing your job, or you do know and you're lying. And you're covering up because you're embarrassed and you won't hold yourself accountable. Hold yourself accountable. We as Christians should hold ourselves accountable first and foremost before we begin to engage the blame game and say, well, the reason I'm drinking is because you're always burning the food at home. You know. I know, I'm being silly. I know. But hold yourself accountable. That's point 3. Point 4. Become familiar with the examples in the Bible. Now, see, here's where Bible study plays. This is why you got to have this other wheel. You got to have the 4 keys working all together simultaneously, like a nice working engine. You know, they're all rolling in the same direction. They're all filled with the same amount of air, so that the tires are all nice and round, and you're just going down the highway. You're just cruising down the highway. You got to be familiar with the examples in the Bible because there are so many stories illustrating so many principles that the answers to God's expectations are most likely embedded in the pages of your own Bible. There are principles in the stories. There are principles even outside of certain stories. You know, you might think about Daniel in the lion's den, and you always looked at it from Daniel's point of view. Well, hey, look at it from the lion's point of view. You know what I'm saying? You know, we always looked at the prophet talking. He's going down the road, and all of a sudden the donkey stops because there's this angel in the way, and the donkey turns around, and, you know, as they said, the jackass talked to the prophet, but don't look at it from the prophet's point of view. Look at it from the donkey's point of view. These are the little nuances of the Bible in the stories embedded, that because we're so used to the pattern of thinking, we always think in this pattern, we don't see the nuances, the new information, the reflection of an insight that we've been missing that might be applicable to something that all of a sudden we're facing, because we're not taking the time to study our Bibles to get familiar with these stories inside and out, upside, down, and under. You know what I'm saying? And also, we're reminded, real quickly here, over in 1 Corinthians, if you turn there, this principle is told to us by the Apostle Paul as he was explaining to the Corinthians in chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians, chapter 10. He says, moreover, brethren, verse 1, I would not that you should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea. They were all baptized of Moses in the cloud and the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat. They did drink the spiritual drink. They drank that spiritual rock that followed them. And by the way, we're told there the rock was Christ. That is in the Old Testament. That was the rock. But with many of them, God was not well pleased, and they threw 21,000 of them. Verse 8, they died out there in the wilderness. We go on here in verse 11, and I say this only to save some time here, I tumble down to the end of the story, or the principle here that is Paul's attempting to tell us. All these things happened unto them for types or examples, and they are written for our warning. That's what admonition means. The Greek word means warning or attention, or to give, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore, let him that thinks he stands take heed, meditate. That's how you take heed. You take heed by taking time to think something through, lest you fall. Well, I think I'm in pretty good position here. I think I'm right in this situation. Or I think I've got the proper perspective about this. Or I think I've got my arms around this issue. But wait a minute, did I think this through? Or is it just my ego talking? Is it just myself, my narcissism, who wants me to be right? Because we're all narcissists to a certain extent. We are, we're lesser and greater degrees, but nevertheless, we all want to be right. We never want to admit wrong. We're all kind of like that. But the bottom line is, it's important that we do take heed, lest we find ourselves not standing as strong as we thought we were. Point number 5. Guard against impulsive thinking. This is very important, brethren. Guard against impulsive thinking or acting on, this is very important, acting on feelings. Learn to think things through. You are entitled to make decisions or change about yourself on your own terms. Do not act without sufficient reason and go beyond the short term. Think things through. What will this lead to in the long term? You think about these people who drank the Kool-Aid. Would you agree that they thought things through? Or how about the ones who killed themselves because of the Hale-Bopp comet? Remember all those that killed themselves? I don't know what they did. I forget now exactly how they killed themselves. Maybe they drank Kool-Aid too, but I was talking about Jim Jones first and now this other one. But my point is, these are obvious extremes where people didn't think things through. Where's that in the Bible? Where did God tell people to kill themselves? Where is it that this stands on solid ground in terms of the Scripture of how this is playing out here, what I'm being told to do? Now that's one aspect. But it could go on and on as well in respect to a career change or an opportunity. It could be positive. It could be an opportunity coming your way. You still have to vet it. Because it's hard to identify whether an opportunity is good or bad until you stop, think, and listen. Add some pros, add some cons, get the paper out, draw the line in the middle, list the goods, list the pluses and the negatives, evaluate. I got to move, that's going to cost me money. Oh, they're going to pick up the bill. Oh, I'm going to get a new car. But then, all this stuff, you got to think about these things. Write them down. So you can evaluate, maybe even share them with a friend that you respect their judgment and maybe insight on, that might be able to help vet you through that particular decision. But don't do things impulsively. Wow, I'm going to be the boss? You're going to give me a whole office? Yeah, where do I sign? And then you don't realize that you're going up in Anchorage, Alaska, where it snows all the time, and all these things come always late, and then you realize, oh man, why did I make this decision? But you jumped too soon. You didn't think it through. You went on feelings. It was impulsive. I've got to buy that. That's what, it's going to look fine, and you find out it doesn't fit, that kind of stuff. So you got to be careful. Don't be impulsive in your thinking. Slow yourself down. Don't act on feelings, especially when you make important decisions. Try to distill the feelings out of the equation and think with your head. Think with your head. Point 6. Learn to use the Sabbath for spiritual inventory review. Learn to use the Sabbath for spiritual inventory review with your family. It's also a good time for family discussion and Bible studies. Get the kids around the table or around the fireplace or whatever. Friday nights when I was in the church in my early years, my girls were 5, 10, 12, 15 years old or so, we'd sit around the fireplace every Friday night. I don't care where I was. I was home, do my best to get home by sunset. And we'd sit down there and we'd Bible study. We'd get little books sometimes. I remember I have 2 daughters. They're grown now, married and so on, with grandkids I have. But I remember, many, many hours getting books like Letters to Virgins. I remember that one book that we went through with them, talking to them and using that book to leverage information about purity and integrity and self-esteem and all the things that some girls make mistakes on regarding these letters from girls who were prematurely made pregnant outside of marriage and so on, making wrong decisions in high school and so forth, and that they could learn from these particular mistakes so that my daughters grew up looking for those signals, being heads up a little bit, and not being taken up with the sweet talking of a guy or somebody who's got ulterior motives for this, that, or the other thing, if you know what I'm saying. And that was only one book. We had other books, different types of things, as well as the Bible that we would incorporate with these that gave us subject material and titles to rally Bible studies around so that we could extrapolate principles and standards from God's Word and apply them to these stories. So, there's a lot of stuff out there. You can go to any kind of religious bookstore and get good books on subjects that, are good in many respects about Christian living. I'm not talking about doctrine. I'm not talking about, established theology. I'm just talking about how to get along in life. There are some good Christian books out there that many of us can learn a lot from in respect to topics and subjects if you want information to build a study around. But take the time and use the Sabbath effectively. Learn to use it for spiritual inventory review, especially with your families, your children, and your mates, if at all possible. Number 7, the last one, 7. Make meditation a major part of your life. Learn to know thyself. Make meditation a major part of your life. Get addicted to it. Get yourself used to doing it so that when you don't do it, you feel like you miss something in your life. Bible study. Get yourself addicted to it. Get yourself addicted to prayer. Get yourself addicted to fasting. These are important elements in the lifestyle of a Christian that we have no choice but to accept is our duty. It is our duty now. And yes, we might not be able to watch TV as often as we'd like. And yes, maybe we can't work on that car because that's our hobby as much as we would like. Or go play soccer as often as we like. Or go down to the gym and work out. Instead of running 5 times a week, we can only run maybe 2 or 3 times a week because that's all we've got the time to do. We got to balance it out. We got to find that balance. You ever hear the term that life is a quest for balance? Life is a quest for balance. We're all in pursuit of balance. Balance in diet, balance in time management, balance in sleep, balance in eat, balance in relationships. Balance, life, is a quest for being able to evenly balance and maximize the effectiveness of the time that we have, because we all have the same amount of time. How we use it makes the difference. And the key to doing it is certainly having God as part and parcel to your life and to your lifestyle. So have the courage. Be something different. Be unnatural. Because your natural self only gets you in trouble. Be unnatural. And let me leave you with this as being unnatural. Try just being a Christian.